Thank you for coming today. The topic of today's presentation is making an impact in governmental affairs. And given the crowd, I won't ask this question, but for those of you who are watching this on videotape, how many of you would be impacted if your state enacted an Amazon-like tax like New York did? How many of you would be impacted negatively if your state or Congress passed the do not track list to prevent companies, to allow people to opt out of behavioral targeting? How many of you would be impacted in a negative way if Congress or your state passed a do not email list, or if Congress decided to reopen the Canned Spam Act? And if any of you have said yes to that question, the next question is how many of you have actually met with your state representative or your member of Congress? And that's why we're here to talk about today. I'm with Wright Andrews, and Wright is the founder of Butera and Andrews, and he was the legislative director for Senator Sam Nunn from Georgia. And to give you a sense of the importance of Senator Nunn, he was former chairman of the Armed Services Committee, a longtime senator, and even though he's been out of the Senate 10 years, he's still a major player in American public policy. Wright was a two-time president of the American League of Lobbyists, and he was named by the Washingtonian as one of the top 50 lobbyists in Washington. My credentials are much more humble. I'm the founder of the Internet Law Center, although I have been active in politics for 30 years. And actually, first time I lobbied, I was 17. But I have the benefit of having learned from one of the best in the business. When I first got out of college, I actually worked for Wright. So these are some of the newspapers that have, which we've been quoted or we have clippings from. But to give you a sense of who the real player is in this presentation, notice which one of us has a Wall Street Journal drawing. That'd be Wright. So we're going to talk about an often used word that seems to have such a negative connotation lately. And the L word, I'm not talking about that L word, and I'm definitely not talking about that L word, nor are we talking about this L word. We're going to talk about lobbyists. Right? Why don't you explain the importance of that picture?
Well, Bennet, that picture just came from a magazine article that listed a number of Washington lobbyists that were supposedly some of the senior men and women in the profession, and they lined us up in the lobby of the Willard Hotel. And it was in the Willard Hotel that the term lobbyist really was devised many years ago, when the lobbyist would lobby members of Congress that were staying there. And they would come into the lobby, they'd be buttonholed, buy them a drink or whatever, and that was the old days. So that lobby is very symbolic, and it is where the term lobbyist came from.
Now, we can talk about who a lobbyist is, but look at this picture, right? Which one of these is not a lobbyist?
Well, I can tell you that it's hard to think, but the Dalai Lama seems to be. Yes. I think it's more, to focus on that. And Bono looks to me like he is too. And I think, Bennet, the point you're making is that people often attack lobbying or attack lobbyists, and they say, oh, you have all these special interests that are doing things in Washington. Well, what they forget is that all interests are special.
Right.
All interests have a legitimate and constitutional right to advocate their position, to explain to Congress what their interests are. People outside of the Beltway, as we say, outside of Washington, typically don't understand. They often have, as I said, a negative attitude. My own mother, when I told her I was going to be a lobbyist, she cried. She had such a negative view. It took me a while to explain to her that no, I was just being an advocate. I'm a lawyer advocate. Many lobbyists are lawyers, many are not. You don't have to be. But
the funny thing is that if someone had an issue before a court, they wouldn't hesitate to hire a lawyer to represent them.
Absolutely.
But somehow the thought of hiring a lobbyist is a different matter.
And Bennet, you know, I think it's relevant to mention right now, many of us in the lobbying profession get a bit, I guess, upset, but we've seen it happen time and again. Every presidential campaign, you have the candidates, usually on both sides, be they Republican or Democrat, they will talk about how they're going to change things. We certainly heard that this time, and take things away from the Washington lobbyists who are running everything. I only wish that I had the power that is attributed to us. But lobbying is important, and we do make a major impact on public policy.
And in order to give you a sense of the importance of it, we're going to give you start off with two cautionary tales. And the first is what I'm going to give you. It's a tale of a cookie that was a spy. In 2004, the House of Representatives, late in the session, passed what would be the first of several spyware bills to pass the House of Representatives. And at that time, spyware was defined to include such evil and nefarious things as HTML, Java, and worst of all, you know, drum roll please, is third-party cookies. All that was included in the definition of spyware. Luckily, the session ran out, the Senate didn't take action. But in 2005, I got the opportunity, along with a colleague of mine, to do a 90-minute Internet 101 presentation to all the staff members of the key committee that would have jurisdiction over this issue in the House of Representatives. And I'm halfway through this presentation, and all of a sudden, one of the senior staff people goes, "Oh, I get it. You guys aren't so bad." And I must confess, part of my first reaction was to want to reach across the table and just, you know, grab her and shake her. But then I thought for a second, these are all very smart people. And 10 minutes after they leave this room talking to us, they're going to be talking to someone else about maybe nuclear waste or healthcare, or you name the issue. They deal with, you know, 20 issues in a single day. But what happened in 2004 versus unlike 2005, I wasn't at that table in 2004. No one was at that table in 2004. And so they only can use the information they have. And if you don't give them that information, they're going to make their own conclusions. And then Wright has a tale about what happens when, even if you do get involved, but you're perceived as politically weak, what can happen?
Well, Bennet, I think you're referring to when we were working on legislation making it relevant to the state of Nevada. We were representing the state of Nevada on nuclear waste disposal. And there was a general view that here is just one little single state. They can't do very much, all the other states gang up against them and so forth. But Nevada got very active through its delegation and through hiring us to work and lobby. They were able to put together a very effective effort that is going on literally in terms of keeping the nuclear waste dump from being here for years. And I think the point you're getting at is that if you get active, you can make a difference. But you know, one other thing, Bennet, I'd like to comment on.
Sure.
Going back to your experience, I can't tell you how many times over the years I have seen situations where the congressional staff and the congressional members are absolutely convinced, based on their limited knowledge, that they are solving a big social problem. They are often making these decisions, hundreds of them. They're doing the best they can. They almost always are doing it in good faith. But the lack of information you referred to is so important. They have to be informed to make the decisions. And you can bet one thing, if you aren't in there telling your story, your enemies, your competitors, your critics are going to be there. And I will guarantee you also that what they say is not going to be what you say in many cases. So if you're not defending yourself, don't rely on your enemies to do so. And those decisions are going to be made, like it or not.
And here's some of the things those decisions will be made on, possibly this year. We ended the last Congress with a lot of focus on behavioral targeting, several congressional hearings. And the then chair of the House Internet Subcommittee promised that he was going to come back this year with comprehensive privacy legislation. At the state level, a number of states last year had email bills, and that's going to continue this year. The Amazon tax, it worked in New York, and we're working in a very difficult climate. States are starved for resources. If they can find a way to get more cash that's not politically difficult, they'll definitely do it. And one in California, for example, their version of the Amazon tax was someone tried to redefine the definition of property to include digital downloads. So it would have been the effect of taxing your iTunes. It didn't succeed. It doesn't mean they're not going to try again. And then we've all dealt with some of the legislation that's come out of Utah that one point they tried to ban bidding on competitors' keyword ads, and he also passed spyware legislation that got overturned. So one state can make a big impact because the internet doesn't have state boundaries. Now, one thing that's plagued this industry, and this is in 2004, the Internet Industry Association published a report that basically said, we're poorly organized, we are reactive, we basically act on an ad hoc basis, we don't plan ahead, and we're getting our ass beat. And so how much of that has changed since 2004? And we are somewhat better organized, but we're still very much a fractured industry. And so I took a look at where we stood compared to other industries. So is it fair to make a judgment about the internet industry versus other industries? How are they different? I looked at the 50 companies from a whole host of industries, the ones listed here, and including a number of internet companies, and focusing in particular on Yahoo, Google, eBay, Amazon. I mean, those are the internet giants. And how much do they spend on lobbying and PACs over the last 6 years? Well, AT&T, they weren't even the biggest one, but they're relevant. They spent over $80 million during that period. Microsoft, just under $20 million. What about the 4 internet giants? Combined, they were just over $10 million, when the average company spent only $9 million. So the 4 internet giants were just a little bit more than the average company. So clearly they were falling behind. And another area they're falling behind is that a lot of powerful industries also have a very powerful association. So it's not just the 1 or 2 lead companies that are making the impact, but the associations also can make a significant impact. Take, for example, the CTIA or the National Association of Realtors. They make a significant impact, and there's no one really in our space doing that just yet. Now, one thing I try to stress is you talk to a business person about lobbying, and their basic response is, well, I'm a business person. Why don't you talk to me about business? Well, my maxim is that lobbying is business by other means. People are trying to achieve a result that's favorable for their business when they go to lobby. That's all. It's natural. You act in your own best interest. And so it does have real business consequences. We saw what happened in 2006 when the telecoms were able to crush net neutrality. Even though there were over 1 million signatures in favor of net neutrality, it never really came to a vote. And then this year, there's been a lot of focus on Microsoft flexing its muscles and arguably outmaneuvering Google over the Google-Yahoo deal. So, but you don't have to be a Microsoft or a Google to have an impact. Many Davids always are bigger than a single Goliath. And take, for example, the National Library Association. Several hundred librarians descend on Capitol Hill every year. And believe me, they get noticed. And they get noticed because every community has a librarian. And look at this list of the Power 25 from Fortune. How many of them are fat cats? None. National Rifle Association. Those are a bunch of guys with guns. They're not fat cats, but they're very powerful because there's many of them. And they're organized, and they're in every congressional district.
Bennet, can I add a comment there? You've just highlighted some of the major groups that many people in the audience and that are watching out on the net will be familiar with. But one thing people need to recognize is that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of lobbyists in Washington today, indeed at the state levels too. But in Washington, those thousands of lobbyists are there representing a tremendous range of interest. There are so many really arcane organizations. Let's just say, for example, the Toilet Seat Manufacturers Association. Groups like that will have an
TSMA.
association and a lobbyist in Washington. Again, they don't do it but for one reason. They have recognized that decisions are made in Washington that impact their business, their bottom line. And that's why we have more lobbying going on today than we did earlier. Finally, groups are waking up to the impact that federal policy decisions have on them. Now, I have a strong suspicion your industry is not very awake on it, but we can talk about that more in a minute.
We can. And I think, the toilet seat manufacturers, I mean, basically they got organized and decided they weren't going to take it sitting down. But
that's ad lib, ladies and gentlemen.
Right. Why don't you talk about how you can influence? What are some of the key factors to influence legislative decisions?
Okay. Well, let me maybe go off that a little bit.
Sure.
And talk about some of the things that lobbyists do, and then pick up on that, because as I indicated, most people that aren't in Washington lobbying every day don't have much of a clue what's going on. They tend to think that all we do is pass out cash or checks. They don't realize how the game, if you will, is played. Lobbyists do a lot of things. One of the first things you do, of course, and very basic, is you monitor what's going on. You try to keep up with all the bills, the hearings, the policy actions that are being taken in the Congress or the agencies, and you take that, you try to analyze it as to how it would impact your client, but you report it back to your client. And you say, hey, industry, this bill has been dropped in. It looks to me like these provisions could impact you. You try, after you figure how a bill, for example, is going to impact your client, you then try to educate. You really spend time educating the people on the Hill. Here, from our perspective, is how it's going to impact us. Now, somebody else will say, well, our perspective is a little different, but there are a lot of different perspectives, but the education is very important. You spend a lot of time as a lobbyist drafting materials. When I worked on the Hill, I always remember the lawyer who came in, handed me literally a lawyer's brief about an inch thick, dropped it on my desk and said, such and such bill is really a mess. It would impact my client. Read that. That's all you got to know. Let me know when y'all have taken care of it. Well, I wish I had time to read that inch-thick document. But as you, I think, referenced earlier, people on the Hill are very busy. You have to make presentations. You have to write materials that are very brief, concise, and that communicate. Yes, sometimes you may have to have that additional one-inch document, but lobbyists spend a lot of time trying to think how to craft the message. They spend a lot of time thinking on strategy. You have a tremendous range of activities involving meetings. Your meetings on the Hill. I called back, my son is a lobbyist, works with me. I called back today and he was almost panting. He is going through so many meetings on the Hill on an issue that we have as an early crisis in the year. But meeting, and something that I didn't recognize when I was on the Hill was the amount of time lobbyists have to spend meeting with other lobbyists. As we say, downtown off the Hill, where all of the lobbying groups, the trade groups and so forth have, on almost any interest you get involved in, there are a number of interested parties, any issue. And you try to work out compromises with other players. You try to work together because you have more political clout as a unit. You try to develop common positions, again, et cetera. But all of that amount of time, you don't think about, you may be spending 50% of your time or more working, as we say, downtown with other lobbyists. You also, quite frankly, in many cases have to spend a lot of time with your clients, because most clients certainly in many industries, do not have a good handle on the political process, what they need to do, how it works, et cetera. So you have to do that. You increasingly on big issues have to spend time either yourself or with having specialists work on grassroots capabilities where people, and Bennet, this is where the little guys, if you will, when you band together, having people organized back at the grassroots level who can and will contact Congress quickly in response to your request that they do so. That's again where the internet is wonderful, and emails and potentials and so forth now. But again, grassroots is important. Lobbyists have people from industry do as we call fly-ins, where we will schedule sessions sometimes once a quarter, just depends, sometimes once a year. You reference the librarians, but where people in an industry come in and they establish a regular presence going to their House and Senate members saying, "Hi, I'm Wright Andrews from such and such company in your district. I employ 500 people. This legislation is pending in the Congress. You're on the committee. If it's written this way, it will put my company out of business and all these people are going to lose jobs. If it's changed this way, you can still get the same policy impact, but it becomes workable." Again, having the constituent come in like that is critical. I've been on the phone in fact, almost all of this morning, the phone and email, on a legislative issue that we're working on. And what we are focused on in that case is connecting the local constituents with certain key members. And we are able to show and explain that if certain legislation that's going to be considered, and then starting tomorrow, and it will probably be one of the very first bills up, if certain provisions in there are passed as drafted, that will take thousands and thousands of jobs away in certain members' districts and states. Well, in today's economy, ladies and gentlemen,
yes,
those offices all of a sudden are getting religion, they're waking up. They are going to others saying, wait a minute, we have to have changes. But that is a constituent contact. If we had more time, we would have the people fly in if need be, but it's a very, very short thing. But again, all of this is just to say there are many things that you do. Now, one thing I didn't cover, but I want to emphasize because it ties in with what you're saying on political expenditures generally. For better or worse, we have to spend more time and indeed more money than most of us would like attending political events. The reality is that the members of the House and Senate have very expensive political campaigns. They are always raising money. They never seem to have enough. There is an endless number of events in Washington and indeed around the country where people are asking for political contributions. It's legal. It is a correct way of participating in the system. But that said, most of us, and indeed I find most clients, would say, gee, I really wish I could spend that money giving it to my church, buying a new fishing rod, whatever it might be. But that's part of the process. And I can also say, and I've said this in a speech in Washington the other day, that lobbyists often don't like to acknowledge in public how important money is. But, as long as it's done legally, it's right, it's acceptable, and the reality, again, is it's damned important. You have to be involved politically in the contribution process, giving money, and indeed, hopefully, raising money. Any industry that has a lot at stake usually figures that out relatively quickly. They establish political action committees within an association level. They will establish them within individual companies, et cetera. But all of that goes on. Now, just very, very quickly, looking at the list, I hit a number of those. But you have to, in the strategy area, you have to look at each issue, sort of develop your own plan. one thing, for example, is certain members are able to get things done more than other members. People usually on a committee that is the source of the legislation that the legislation has to pass through are usually able to do a whole lot more and will have much more influence. You have to pick out, as we say, our horse, our champion. Try to get them working either for us or against us on an issue. But again, that goes into the clout of the member, et cetera. I mentioned campaign contributions. Timing. Timing is a very funny thing that plays in. Again, referencing what I'm doing right now. A number of us are working on this particular issue that I won't discuss specifically, but we thought it would come up April, May. To all of our horror, we found that for a whole range of crazy reasons, it, as I said, is coming up tomorrow. Now, when I planned my Vail vacation that I just got back from, I can assure you I did not think in my wildest dreams that this would be coming up before the inauguration. But I can tell you that I spent 4 days in Vail, locked in a hotel room, never ever going anywhere other than at night. I did go out and get something to eat, working frantically, analyzing, drafting, etc., because of the timing. It's coming up, not like any of us thought, and we all got, in a sense, caught. But timing can change, and it's there.
If I can add one point on timing, one thing that really struck home with me was one member, after visiting them, they appreciated the fact that we came well before the issue was coming to the floor. Yep. We educated them before it was crisis point. He says, I get all these faxes on the eve of a vote from companies I don't know.
Yep.
But now you're here. When I get a call from you saying this is important, I'm going to understand why it's important.
Yeah, and Bennet, in that regard, something else about the legislative process generally that I think we lobbyists can say we've had so many experiences on is the earlier you get in, the better, as a general rule. It is so much more difficult to make changes many times as you get closer to passage. Earlier on, as the legislation is being shaped, early deals being cut, you can really shape something. You can prevent some really bad things from happening. But the closer you get to enactment, as a general rule, the harder it is to get those changes there. And tied in with your point on to have the constituent of the interest in early and explain it, that is so much more helpful for the lobbyist and for the interest than if they wait till it's too late or almost too late.
Now you have the 10 tips for effective lobbying.
Okay. These were just some points to use as an example. If you go in and have the lobbying meetings, as I would suggest this industry does, if it becomes more organized, and I understand it is, and again, I want to comment on that in a minute, but you have to do some common sense things. You come into Washington, what are you going to say? What are you going to do when you go in? You need to be informed about not only your issue, you want to know that, but you want to be informed about the member. You walk into their office, this is my congressman. Gee, I ought to know if he or she is on the relevant committees. I need to be prepared so when they ask me questions, I can answer them in an intelligent way. I need to be on time. These people are so damn busy. They've got meetings. And if you show up 15, 30 minutes late, hey, you've missed your chance. You've probably missed your meeting, and you've created a bad impression. Be brief and be focused. People spend a great deal of wasted time in lobbying sessions, and certainly constituents do when they come in, by not being focused and saying things in a simple, concise manner, focusing on 2 or 3 big points. Members of Congress, as has been suggested, are very busy. They're just flooded with data and information coming in. They can't retain but so much, at least in initial meetings. If you tell them 20 things you need, you'll lose them. Tell them just the 1 or 2 big points. catch their attention, get them interested, and then speak to the staffer at a later point in more detail. The staffer's job, my job when I was on the Hill, was to learn much more detail. But to get my boss interested, you had to focus on some things. Again, be factual, never lie to folks there, ask questions. You know, it's important to engage in some dialogue. What do you think about it? You know, we often find when we ask those questions that they, you know, will say something hostile, and then you can find why they have a bad opinion. And much of the time you can change that, but you would never know because they're very, very polite. I've seen so many people come back from meetings on the Hill despite coaching them on things like this. And I say, well, what did the senator say? He said, oh, he said he'd help me if he could. Well, that's nice, but did he say he would? Can he? Well, I don't know, but he was mighty nice. That's particularly with the Southern members with a Southern accent like me. But again, things to think about. Be courteous, as I said, be a constituent to the extent you can. Request something. Request that they co-sponsor a bill, for example, or that they oppose a profession, or that they become involved on something at least. It's like, you know, Senator, this is going to be coming up, and it really impacts, you know, 5,000 jobs here in your state, and you need to pay attention, have your staff pay attention to this, and be involved and help shape it as it goes along. Follow up, you know, don't just make that Hill fly-in visit once a year and don't ever talk to them again. You need to be sending them a thank you for meeting with you, send them some additional information, drop them a line periodically or an email, come back next year.
If I can supplement as it relates to, you know, especially in tech legislation and the internet, the first thing you got to do is you can't assume that they understand your business.
Absolutely.
Many of you may have seen the Katie Couric interview, but you know, I don't know if you saw this part. But the other thing is this comment by Ted Stevens, obviously about the internet being a set of tubes, has you know, been all over YouTube. But what people don't understand is what's significant about that statement was at the time Ted Stevens made that statement, he was chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee. That was the committee in the Senate that had jurisdiction over the internet. So this is the #1 guy on internet issues who thinks the internet's a set of tubes. So you got to remember that these guys don't understand technology. So how do you communicate to them? Well, you try to break it down, keep it simple. When we did our Internet 101, we tried to explain just how cookies worked in a very simple, practical way, walking them step by step. I'm explaining what HTML is and why it was stupid to make that spyware. And then, as Wright mentioned, you got to make it relevant to them. Explain what impact it will have in their district. You know, if you can find other allies, if there's like a white hat association or someone that agrees with you, make sure they know it. And then, obviously, Wright, why don't you talk a little bit about associations?
One of the major ways that people influence policy in Washington is through associations, or sometimes a little less formal group, a lobbying or legislative coalition. But an association provides a way that many smaller interests, or even bigger interests, but essentially that an industry can have a common voice in Washington. It lets them, again, monitor, for example, keep in touch with what's going on and let you know it. You know, it takes some time and money to establish a Washington presence. You do have to have a staff. As I understand it, in this industry, Bennet, from what you've told me and speaking with some others here, quite frankly, I'm astounded that the industry has such a little organization for an industry this size, and with one, indeed, as you pointed out, that has the level of economic interest at stake in Washington. I suppose maybe being here in Las Vegas as an appropriate place for a meeting. I also suggest the industry likes to gamble. I'd like to suggest that, boy, from what I hear, the folks are really gambling with political issues by not being involved. I think most of these other points we've talked about earlier, but a key thing is maintaining a continuing presence, having information flowing back and forth, and having professionals that establish a regular plan and program for you that do all of the many things that I have, for example, on my checklist that a lobbyist needs to be doing. If you do that, you can be much more effective. You can do it in a politically cost-effective manner too. If you do it individually, that's great, but for smaller organizations, it's generally much more efficient if you do that. Now, this is not to say some large groups, Yahoo, Google, whoever, certainly having them active on behalf of the industry is great. I don't suspect that all the time their interests are necessarily the same as what the mass of industry, if you will, is. But again, having organization is critically important, and you know, I hope that if I speak next year, Bennet, here, that you'll have more organization, and you'll have this room just running over with people who recognize by that time that they have a lot at stake in Washington.
And the point I always try to hammer home to people are basically Einstein's 3 rules. The first is, you know, is your congressman or state representative or whoever, is he an Einstein? If he is, great, you're lucky. Not everyone is. But the most important rule is Einstein's rule number 2. Do you trust that guy or woman to write your business plan? Because if you don't, then you should be in meeting with him and explaining how your business works, because he may be writing your business plan without even knowing it. And then, of course, the third Einstein rule is there's no third Einstein rule. So the key is understand that Congress and state legislators affect your business in very real ways. Any questions? All right, well, thank you very much for your time. Again, I'm Bennet Kelley. This is Wright Andrews. I offer a free newsletter called the Monday Memo. It's a bi-weekly newsletter. It's voted one of the top 100 internet law resources in the country. So I invite you to sign up for that, and look forward to talking to you some more.
Great.
Thank you.